And if there is no one else? Audrey Langford's question landed harder than anything Graham Mercer had heard in the previous 40 minutes. Graham sat at the end of a polished conference table on the 27th floor of Langford Systems, his charcoal wool sport coat still damp at the shoulders from the cold Minneapolis rain. Across from him sat 4 executives. Audrey, the company's billionaire founder and CEO, had barely spoken until now. The scenario on the screen behind them was simple. A major client's logistics platform fails at 6 in the evening. Graham is the most experienced person available, but his 11-year-old daughter has a school performance that same night. What does he do? Graham thought about Sadie's note on the refrigerator that morning. Don't forget, 7 o'clock, I'm third from the left. He needed this job, more than he wanted anyone in this room to know. But needing something didn't make every answer acceptable. If it's a genuine emergency, Graham said, I stay until someone qualified can take over. But if the company has built a team where one person is the only person who can solve a critical problem, then the failure happened long before 6 o'clock. One board member shifted in his chair. Audrey studied him. And if there is no one else? Graham could have changed his answer. He knew what they wanted to hear. Instead, he said, then whoever designed the team failed before 6 o'clock. The room went quiet. Before we go further, how old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever had to choose between work and someone who was counting on you? 2 hours later, Graham stood in the lobby reading the rejection email. They had gone with another candidate. He slipped his phone into his pocket without arguing with the recruiter or asking for reconsideration. For years of raising Sadie alone had taught him something about disappointment. Not every closed door needed to be kicked. Still, this one hurt. The salary would have given them breathing room. More importantly, the work had excited him in a way his current consulting contracts hadn't for years. Graham buttoned his navy raincoat and walked outside. Upstairs, Audrey was reviewing the interview scorecards when one comment caught her attention. Strong candidate. Questionable executive commitment due to family constraints. She frowned. His technical scores were excellent. His leadership scores were higher. Audrey opened the interview notes. Nothing suggested Graham lacked commitment. He had simply refused to define commitment the way they did. Audrey looked toward the windows. Far below, Graham was crossing the rain-darkened plaza, heading toward the parking structure. She checked the time, then the rejection timestamp. Something about it felt wrong. Audrey grabbed her camel overcoat, ignored her assistant's surprised question, and headed for the elevators. By the time she reached the lobby, Graham was almost across the plaza. Mr. Mercer. He didn't hear her. Audrey stepped into the rain. Graham. He stopped and turned. For several seconds, Graham simply stared. The billionaire CEO who had just rejected him was running through the October rain after him. Mr. Mercer, wait. Graham stood in the rain with one hand wrapped around the strap of his messenger bag. Audrey Langford stopped several feet away, breathing harder than she probably wanted him to notice. Water darkened the shoulders of her camel overcoat. A few strands of blonde hair had come loose near her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Graham glanced at his watch. For 38. I have to pick up my daughter. I know. Audrey caught her breath. I'm not asking you to come back for another interview. Good, because I already failed the first one. There was no bitterness in his voice, which somehow made the words land harder. Audrey looked back toward the glass tower behind her. I read the final evaluation. Graham waited. You were rejected because they questioned your commitment. I figured. You figured. I've been in enough rooms like that. Audrey frowned. Then why didn't you challenge it? Because you're allowed to hire whoever fits your company. And you don't think you fit? Graham pulled his raincoat tighter against the wind. I think that's a different question from whether I can do the job. Audrey had spent 20 years talking to people who wanted something from her. Funding, promotions, contracts, access. Graham seemed mostly interested in getting to his car. I want 10 minutes, she said. I don't have 10 minutes. That answer surprised her more than his interview had. My daughter gets out at 5:15. Traffic gets ugly when it rains. I can have a car take you. No, thank you. Mr. Mercer, Graham is fine. Audrey stopped. He wasn't being rude. That was what made him difficult to push against. She nodded toward the covered entrance beside the plaza. 5 minutes. Right there. Then you leave. Graham checked his watch again. 5. They stepped beneath the awning. Audrey got directly to it. Were you serious about what you said upstairs? Which part? That if a company depends on one person being available at all times, The company designed the problem. Yes, even at an executive level. Especially there. Audrey folded her arms. You understand leadership sometimes means putting the job first. Of course. But not over your daughter. Sometimes over dinner. Sometimes over a weekend. Maybe even over something important if there's a real emergency. Graham paused. But if everything is an emergency, then somebody is using sacrifice to cover bad planning. Audrey's expression tightened. Graham saw it. That sounded personal. It was. The rain hammered the awning between them. For years earlier, Graham explained, his wife, Melissa, had died after a sudden brain aneurysm. At the time, he had been managing regional operations for a national distribution company. He knew how to build backup plans for warehouses in 3 states. At home, he had built none. When Melissa died, Graham discovered how many nights he had assumed she would always be there. Sadie had been 7. She has 1 parent now, he said. I'm not going to make her schedule an appointment with him. Audrey looked away toward the street. For once, she had no polished executive response. I'm sorry about your wife. Thank you. His phone vibrated. A message from Sadie. Remember, I need poster board tonight. Purple, not blue. Graham smiled despite himself. Audrey noticed. I'd like to continue this conversation tomorrow. Graham slipped the phone away. Is this another interview? No, a job offer. No, then what is it? Audrey hesitated. That was unusual enough to make Graham pay attention. I'm not sure yet. He studied her for a second. Tomorrow morning is difficult. Audrey almost laughed. I'm offering you a meeting with the CEO of Langford Systems. I know. And you're checking your calendar? My daughter has an orthodontist appointment at 8. Audrey stared at him. Graham took out his phone, checked the next day, and said, 10:30 works. For perhaps the first time in years, Audrey Langford found herself being fitted into someone else's schedule. 10:30, she said. Graham nodded and stepped back into the rain. Audrey watched him head toward the parking garage. She had run outside believing she needed to correct a hiring mistake. Now she was beginning to wonder whether the mistake was much larger than one rejected candidate. At 10:29 the next morning, Graham Mercer stepped off the elevator on the 27th floor. He had already taken Sadie to her orthodontist appointment, dropped her at school, and answered 2 consulting emails from his car. His pale blue Oxford shirt was freshly pressed, but he had skipped the sport coat. This wasn't an interview anymore, and he didn't want to pretend otherwise. Audrey Langford was waiting in a smaller conference room with 2 coffees. I didn't know how you take yours. Black. She pushed one toward him. Lucky guess. Graham sat. Audrey didn't. Behind her, Minneapolis looked gray beneath a low October sky. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, she began. About emergencies. Graham took a sip. That sounds dangerous. A faint smile crossed her face, then disappeared. Do you know how I built this company? I read the public version. Then you know almost nothing. Audrey finally sat across from him. She told him about Langford Systems before the glass tower, before the headlines, before anyone used the word billionaire next to her name. 13 years of missed vacations. Christmas Eve calls. Sleeping on an office couch during product launches. A relationship that ended because she canceled. One dinner too many. I never asked anyone here to do something I wasn't willing to do myself, she said. Graham nodded. I believe you. Audrey seemed surprised. You say that like it's not a defense. It isn't. Her eyes narrowed. Graham leaned back. If you hurt yourself building something, that doesn't mean everyone who comes after you has to get hurt the same way. That's a convenient philosophy when you're not responsible for thousands of employees and hundreds of clients. And yours is convenient when you get to decide which sacrifices count as commitment. Silence settled between them. This time neither looked away. Audrey tapped one finger against the table. So let's make yesterday's question harder. 6 o'clock. Your daughter has something important. A client's system goes down. There's real money at risk. What do? I stay if I'm actually needed. Audrey paused. That's not what you said yesterday. It's exactly what I said. You said you'd leave. I said I'd make sure somebody qualified could take over. And if nobody can, then I stay. Audrey stared at him. Graham continued. My daughter being important doesn't mean nothing else is important. I'm a parent, not a hostage. For the first time, Audrey laughed. Graham smiled briefly. Then his expression turned serious. But there's a difference between an emergency and a company that runs on emergencies. If every important problem requires the same 5 people to cancel their lives, you don't have dedicated employees. You have a design flaw. Audrey looked toward the window. That sentence bothered her because she could immediately name 5 people. Maybe more. You think Langford Systems is badly designed? I don't know enough to say. But you think I might be. Graham considered the question. I think you build a company around what you were personally capable of surviving. Audrey's face hardened. And I think, Graham added, you started treating survival as a qualification. That one landed. She stood and walked toward the window. Graham checked the time but didn't move. After a while, Audrey said, we've lost several strong managers in the last 3 years. People leave. Companies. I know. She turned back. But I've always assumed the ones who left simply wanted something less demanding. Graham picked up his coffee. Maybe they did. Audrey frowned. He shrugged. Less demanding isn't automatically less serious. The meeting ended without an offer, apology, or handshake promising anything. Graham left at 11:15. Audrey remained alone. Then she opened her laptop and sent one message to Human Resources. I want 3 years of management hiring, promotion, and exit data. Include stated reasons for departure, interview scoring, and after-hours workload. No summary. Raw data. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. Then she added, and flag every evaluation that uses the words commitment, availability, or flexibility. For the first time, Audrey wasn't asking whether Graham Mercer belonged at Langford Systems. She was asking how many people like him the company had already taught itself not to see. By Friday afternoon, Audrey had stopped seeing the spreadsheet as data. It looked more like a pattern no one had wanted to name. 27 managers had left Langford Systems in 3 years. 9 had mentioned caregiving responsibilities in exit interviews. 6 more had cited unpredictable hours. Several high performers had stayed but transferred out of leadership tracks. No conspiracy. No cruel executive hiding reports. Just hundreds of small decisions that all leaned in the same direction. Audrey scrolled through old interview notes. Limited flexibility. May struggle with executive availability expectations. Strong performer, but personal obligations could affect responsiveness. Then she found a phrase almost identical to the one written about Graham. She closed the laptop. Across town, Graham was standing in a grocery store aisle holding 2 boxes of pasta while Sadie examined them like a scientist. This one has more protein, he said. This one tastes like food. You haven't tried the other one. I have instincts. Graham put Sadie's choice in the cart. Their Friday routine was painfully ordinary. Groceries, takeout if the week had been rough, laundry, then whatever movie Sadie claimed everyone at school had already seen. Graham liked ordinary. Ordinary stayed where you put it. His phone buzzed. A consulting client wanted to move Monday's meeting from 10 to 3. Graham immediately typed that 3 wouldn't work. Sadie glanced over. You have something? I pick you up at 3:20. I can take the bus. No, Dad. I take the bus sometimes. Not if I can get you. She leaned against the cart. That's not the same thing. Graham looked at her. Sadie was 11, which meant she had recently developed the irritating ability to notice things adults preferred to hide. At home, she saw the Langford Systems rejection email open on his laptop while looking for a school document. You didn't get it? Graham shut the screen halfway. No, I'm sorry. It's okay. Did you want it? He hesitated. Yeah. Sadie sat across from him at the kitchen table. Was it because of me? No, the answer came too quickly. She noticed. Graham rubbed a hand over his face. They asked what I'd do if work needed me when you had something important. And you said you'd pick me? It was more complicated than that. Sadie thought for a moment. Did they ask you to miss everything? Or did you decide they would? Graham went still. I've worked at places like that. That's not what I asked. He almost smiled. Almost. After Sadie went upstairs, Graham remained at the table. For years ago, after Melissa died, he had made rules. No job that required constant travel. No position where he couldn't control most evenings. No relying on babysitters unless necessary. No promises to Sadie that work could casually break. Those rules had saved them. But somewhere along the way, Graham had stopped asking whether each rule was still protecting their life, or simply protecting him from ever feeling helpless again. Across Minneapolis, Audrey reopened her laptop. Graham had forced her to question the system she had built. Without knowing it, Sadie had just forced Graham to question the one he had built too. Neither of them was ready to admit it yet. But the problem was no longer a failed interview. On Monday morning, Graham found a courier envelope leaning against his front door. Inside was a new offer from Langford Systems. not a revised interview invitation. An offer. He read it once while standing in the kitchen, then again after sitting down. Director of Operations Integration. The title he had interviewed for. The compensation was better than he expected, but that wasn't what held his attention. Attached to the standard agreement was a separate page labeled Working Arrangement. Flexible start and end times. No unplanned travel without his agreement except in defined emergencies. Remote work flexibility when Sadie needed him. A designated deputy with mandatory cross-training so Graham would never be the only person capable of handling a critical system. At the bottom was a handwritten note. This is what I should have offered the first time. Audrey Graham stared at it. For 4 years, he had trained himself not to trust doors that opened too easily. This one looked almost perfect. That bothered him. At 11, he walked into Audrey's office carrying the envelope. She was wearing a dark forest green wool suit, and there was no board, no HR director, no audience waiting to watch him accept. Well, Audrey asked. Graham placed the agreement on her desk. This is generous. That sounds like something people say before no. I didn't say no. You brought the paperwork back. I brought a question. Audrey leaned back. Of course you did. Graham pointed to the working arrangement. Is this company policy now? No. It's your agreement. Does anyone else at this level have it? Parts of it, probably. All of it. Audrey's silence answered. Graham walked to the window. Below them, people crossed the downtown sidewalks in coats, shoulders tucked against the late October wind. You looked at the data, he said. Audrey's expression changed. How do you know? Because 3 days ago you were defending the system. Now you're offering me protection from it. I'm offering you a way to do the job without abandoning your daughter. I appreciate that. Then what's the problem? Graham turned. What happens to the next father who doesn't make you run after him? Audrey said nothing. Or the woman taking care of her mother, Graham continued. Or the manager with a sick spouse. What happens if they don't have the exact resume you want badly enough to make an exception? This offer is about you. That's the problem. Audrey stood. No, Graham. The problem is that you told me what you needed, I listened, and now you're criticizing me for giving it to you. I didn't ask for special treatment. You asked for a company that doesn't depend on one person. So build one. That doesn't happen in a weekend. I know. Then what exactly do you expect me to do? Graham looked at the contract again. A week earlier, he would have dreamed about terms like these. Now accepting them felt strangely uncomfortable. If I take this while everyone else still has to prove commitment by giving up whatever matters outside this building, then I'm not challenging the system anymore. I'm benefiting from it. Audrey's jaw tightened. You realize most people would simply say thank you. I am thankful. You have a remarkable way of showing it. Graham almost smiled, but Audrey wasn't finished. You keep talking about systems because systems are safe, she said. They're abstract. You can criticize them without risking anything. That's not fair, isn't it? She walked around the desk. I ran after you. I reopened a decision. I reviewed 3 years of data. I put something concrete in front of you. What have you risked? Graham stared at her. I risked the job. No, you walked away from it. The distinction hit harder than he expected. Audrey lowered her voice. Maybe walking away is your answer to everything that threatens your boundaries. Graham's expression hardened. You don't know enough about me to say that. Then stop acting like you know everything about how I should run my company. Silence filled the office. For the first time, neither of them had the moral high ground. Graham picked up the agreement. Audrey watched him. I'm not signing this today, he said. I assumed you wouldn't. He reached the door, then stopped. Your offer really is generous. Audrey looked down at her desk. And your question is really inconvenient. Graham nodded. Those are usually the useful ones. After he left, Audrey stood alone beside the unsigned contract. She had believed the hardest part would be convincing one stubborn man to accept an exception. Now she understood the question he had actually left behind. If a system only became humane when the CEO personally chose someone worth protecting, then nothing fundamental had changed. For the next week, Audrey didn't call Graham. She did something harder. She tried to prove him wrong. At Langford Systems, Audrey approved a small pilot across 2 operations teams. Every critical responsibility would have a trained backup. After-hours emergencies would rotate instead of automatically falling to whoever had the strongest reputation. Managers had to document what only they knew and teach it to someone else. The reaction was immediate. This adds overhead. Clients want their usual contact. We're solving a problem we don't have. Audrey heard every objection. Then one senior manager admitted he hadn't taken a full week off in 18 months because no one else knew one of his client systems well enough. Audrey stared at him. A year ago, she would have considered that dedication. Now she heard something else. Fragility. The pilot moved forward. It was messy. People asked questions they should have learned months earlier. Tasks took longer. One client complained after being transferred to an unfamiliar manager. By Thursday, Audrey's board chair asked whether she was reorganizing company culture because of one unhappy applicant. No, Audrey said. She closed the report in front of her. I'm doing it because one applicant asked a question we should have asked ourselves. Across town, Graham was dealing with a different kind of offer. A regional manufacturing company wanted him as an operations manager. The salary was lower than Langford's offer, but the office was 15 minutes from Sadie's school. Little travel. Predictable hours. Safe. Graham should have felt relieved. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table staring at the offer while Sadie worked on math homework across from him. You're doing the face, she said. What face? The one where your eyebrows look mad at each other. Graham rubbed his forehead. Sadie pointed at the laptop. Is that another job? Yeah. Good job. Good enough. She stopped writing. That didn't sound good. It's stable. So stable matters. I know. Graham waited for her to return to her homework. She didn't. Dad, did you like what you used to do? The question caught him off guard. Before Mom died. Sadie nodded. Graham looked toward the refrigerator, where school schedules, grocery lists, and carefully arranged reminders covered half the door. Yeah, he admitted. I did. You used to talk about work at dinner. I probably talked about work too much. Maybe. I was 7. He smiled. Sadie's voice softened. I don't want you missing everything because of me. I don't. I know. But I also don't want to be the reason you never do anything hard. Graham looked at her. For 4 years, he had told himself he was protecting Sadie from instability. Some of that was true. But after losing Melissa without warning, Graham had begun treating uncertainty like an enemy he could defeat with enough rules. No unexpected travel. No unpredictable schedules. No depending on anyone unless absolutely necessary. No situation he couldn't control. Boundaries had helped him rebuild their life. He was beginning to see how easily boundaries could become walls. His phone buzzed. A former colleague had sent him a business article. Langford Systems tests new leadership coverage model. Graham opened it. Audrey had started changing things. Without him, there was no mention of Graham Mercer. No publicity about the rejected single father who had inspired a billionaire CEO. She wasn't using his story. She wasn't trying to impress him. Graham read the article twice. Sadie watched him. Is that the company? Yeah. The one that didn't hire you? Yeah. What happened? Graham looked at the screen. For the first time since Audrey had run after him in the rain, he understood something that made his own certainty uncomfortable. She had listened. Now the question was whether he knew how to do the same. At 5:47 Thursday evening, Audrey was halfway into her camel overcoat when 3 monitors in the operations center turned red. A major client integration had begun rejecting shipment updates less than 12 hours before launch. 6 months earlier, Audrey would have known exactly what happened next. Someone would call the strongest engineer on the account. That person would cancel dinner. Then everyone would praise the save. Call Daniel, an executive said. He built the original routing layer. Audrey looked through the glass wall. Daniel was already gone. His daughter had a birthday dinner. We have his number, the executive added. Audrey didn't move. Who's on rotation? Priya and Marcus. They've never handled this client alone. Then tonight they stop being people who've never handled this client alone. The executive stared at her. Audrey, this is not the night to test a philosophy. No, she said. It's the night we find out whether we built an actual system. The first hour was ugly. Priya knew the client configuration, but not the oldest routing exceptions. Marcus understood the routing layer, but had never managed this client's data flow. They made one wrong assumption and lost 23 minutes. The client called twice. A board member texted Audrey directly. End the experiment. Get Daniel back online. Audrey read the message and put her phone face down. She wanted to call him. That was the uncomfortable part. Graham's argument had sounded clean in a conference room. Reality was louder. At 7:16, Priya found the first break in the chain. Marcus traced it to a permissions update made during the afternoon deployment. Another engineer on rotation verified the rollback. At 8:03, shipment updates began moving again. Nobody cheered. They were too tired. Audrey stood behind the team as Priya documented everything they had learned. How long would Daniel have taken? Audrey asked. Marcus considered it. Maybe 40 minutes. Audrey nodded. They had taken more than 2 hours. Then Priya said, but next time we won't. That was the part Audrey carried home. Graham learned about the incident the next morning from Noah Bennett, a former colleague who now worked with one of Langford's vendors. Apparently they had a rough one last night, Noah said over the phone. Did they fix it? Eventually. Who did? The rotation team. Graham stopped pouring coffee. They didn't call their senior guy? Nope. Heard Langford herself refused. Graham looked toward the kitchen table. The safer job offer was still there. And signed. Why are you asking? Noah said. I'm not. You absolutely are. Graham smiled. Talk later. After hanging up, he searched for Audrey's number. His thumb hovered over it. Then he stopped, calling her just to say she had proved something would make the moment about him. It wasn't. Audrey had tested her belief when Graham wasn't in the building, when no job offer depended on the outcome, and when changing course would have been easier. That mattered. Later that afternoon, Graham declined the manufacturing job. Not because he had decided to work for Langford Systems. He hadn't. He declined because he finally admitted why he had almost accepted it. It wasn't the work he wanted. It was the certainty. That evening, Sadie found him making dinner. So you turned it down? Yeah. Do you have another job? No, she gave him a look. That seems like questionable planning. Graham laughed. Apparently I'm growing. Sadie stole a piece of bell pepper from the cutting board. Slowly, Graham looked at the empty space on the counter where the offer had been. For years, he had believed being a good father meant eliminating uncertainty before it could reach his daughter. Now he was beginning to understand something harder. Sometimes responsibility meant building enough trust that uncertainty didn't have to control you. The proposal on the boardroom screen had Graham's name on it. Audrey hated that immediately. Mercer leadership exception. Final recommendation. 12 people sat around the table. Outside, the last October leaves were being pushed across downtown Minneapolis by a hard northwest wind. The board chair tapped the document. We keep the current executive standards, he said. You hire Mercer under the terms you already offered him. Problem solved. Audrey looked around the room. Whose problem? A few faces changed. He gets what he wants, the chair said. You get the candidate you want. We avoid forcing an improved operating model across the company. And everyone else. This isn't about everyone else. That was exactly what Audrey had once told Graham. She closed the proposal. The pilot worked. It survived one incident, which is what pilots are supposed to test. It took them more than 2 hours to solve a problem Daniel could have handled in 40 minutes. Audrey nodded. And now 3 more people understand the system well enough that next time Daniel doesn't have to be available. One executive leaned forward. We're not arguing against backups. We're arguing against changing how leadership commitment is evaluated because one rejected applicant objected to it. Audrey looked at him. He didn't change my mind. Then what did? The data. She pushed several pages across the table. Turnover. Exit interviews. Promotion patterns. After-hours workload. These people were telling us something long before Graham Mercer walked into this building. We just had a culture that made it easier not to hear them. The board chair sighed. So this is happening whether Mercer accepts the job or not. Audrey glanced once at the document bearing his name. Then she slid it back across the table. Yes. By noon, the decision was made. Leadership evaluations would no longer treat unrestricted availability as evidence of commitment. Critical teams would establish documented backup coverage. Emergency rotations would expand beyond the pilot. It wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't perfect, but it applied to everyone. At 12:17, Audrey called Graham. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hello. You asked me what happens to the next father. Graham went quiet. Audrey looked through her office window at the city below. I finally have an answer. An hour later, Graham sat across from her again. No special agreement waited on the desk this time. Audrey handed him the approved policy. He read it carefully. This applies company-wide. Leadership functions first. Other teams phase in after review. And if I say no to the job, it still happens. Graham looked up. That answer mattered more than anything else on the page. Audrey folded her hands. The position is still available. Graham exhaled. But, she continued, We're not doing this the way we did before. He raised an eyebrow. No list of everything you refuse to do, Audrey said. If you come here, I need a partner, not someone standing at the edge of every difficult situation with one foot pointed toward the exit. Graham sat back. A few weeks earlier, he would have heard that as a threat. Now he heard the part he hadn't wanted to hear before. She was asking him to risk something too. What do you need? He asked. Audrey's expression softened slightly. Predictable coverage. Honest communication. Travel when the work genuinely requires it, with enough notice whenever possible. And if there's a real emergency, I need to know you won't use the word boundary as an automatic no. Graham nodded slowly. In return, I need the company to mean what this policy says, not just when it's convenient. Agreed. I need a deputy who actually has authority, not someone with my passwords. Agreed. And I need to be able to say, I can't do tonight, but here's what I can do. Without that becoming evidence, I'm less committed. Audrey held his gaze. Agreed. Graham looked down at the policy. He thought about Melissa, about Sadie, about 4 years spent trying to make sure life could never catch him unprepared again. Then he realized what he was doing. He was waiting for certainty before making a choice. There would never be enough. I can travel, he said. Not constantly, and not without planning. But I can. Audrey nodded. I can take some nights when things go wrong. I can ask Sadie's friends' parents for help when I need it. I can let other people carry part of the load. That sounds difficult for you. It is. A small smile appeared on Audrey's face. Good. Graham laughed. Nothing had been signed yet. No salary had changed his life. No billionaire had rescued him. Two stubborn people were simply sitting across a desk, finally discussing what responsibility could look like without demanding surrender. For Graham, that was harder than walking away, which was exactly why he stayed. 3 months later, Minneapolis was buried under fresh January snow. Graham stood near the elevators at Langford Systems, pulling on a heavy charcoal overcoat over his work clothes. A knit scarf, weighted in one pocket, and winter boots had replaced the brown leather shoes he wore to his interview. His phone showed 5:06. Sadie's school program started at 6:30. Then an alert sounded behind him. For half a second, Graham froze. One of the operations dashboards had turned amber. The old version of Graham would have taken off his coat. The older version, the man he had been before Melissa died, might have stayed without even checking the time. Instead, he walked back to the operations desk. His deputy, Priya, was already opening the incident log. I've got it, she said. What are you seeing? Delayed confirmations from 2 regional nodes. Marcus is checking whether it's upstream. Graham asked 2 more questions. Priya answered both. She didn't need rescuing. Graham looked at the screen, then at her. Call me if it crosses the escalation threshold. I will. He hesitated. Priya smiled. Go. So he did. Across the floor, Audrey watched him leave. She wore a dark wool dress beneath her long camel coat, leather gloves tucked under one arm. 3 months earlier, she might have interpreted Graham's departure as evidence that work came second. Now she looked at Priya handling the problem and understood it differently. A strong leader had not abandoned his team. He had helped build a team that could function without him. Langford Systems wasn't magically fixed. Some managers still hated the new rotations. A few clients complained about dealing with different contacts. The company had revised parts of the pilot twice, but fewer people were carrying entire systems alone. And Graham had changed too. He traveled when necessary. He occasionally worked late. He had even allowed Sadie to stay with a friend's family during an overnight client trip without calling every hour. His boundaries remained. The walls did not. At 6:18, Graham slipped into the school auditorium and found a seat near the aisle. Sadie spotted him from the stage. Her face brightened. That was enough. Later, as families crowded into the hallway, Graham felt his phone vibrate. A message from Audrey. Priya handled it. No escalation. Then another appeared. Also, I've been informed there's a decent coffee place near your neighborhood. Saturday? No spreadsheets. Graham smiled. Who's that? Sadie asked. Nobody you need to investigate. That means somebody. He put the phone back in his pocket. He could answer later. Sadie was standing in front of him now. That mattered more. And perhaps that was the quiet truth underneath everything that had happened since one failed interview. Money can change comfort. A title can change access. Power can open doors. But none of those things decide a person's human worth. Graham deserved respect when he needed a job just as much as Audrey deserved respect when she was the billionaire offering one. A person with less money is not smaller, less intelligent, less worthy of dignity, or less deserving of love. And wealth does not make someone cold, cruel, or incapable of changing. Judging people by their bank account, whether they are rich or poor, means missing the human being standing in front of us. 3 months earlier, Audrey had run through the rain because she thought she might lose a valuable employee. What followed taught both of them something larger. People should not have to become exceptional before we treat them fairly. Graham took Sadie's hand as they walked toward the snowy parking lot. This time, nobody ran after him. Nobody needed to.